Betrayal is rarely a sudden thunderclap. It is a slow, silent leak in the foundation of a marriage. Albion thought dumping his chronically ill wife for their 22-year-old Nanny was his ticket to a stress-free life. He forgot one crucial detail: he was merely a puppet in her empire. Albion Montgomery loved the reflection he saw in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office in downtown Seattle. He was a man who believed he had carved his own destiny out of pure granite. At 42, he was the charismatic, silver-tongued CEO of Meridian Analytics, a data firm that had recently secured a massive valuation. To the outside world, Albion was a visionary, a sharp, impeccably tailored executive who commanded boardrooms and graced the covers of business magazines. He possessed the kind of effortless privilege that allowed him to fail upward, though he would never admit it. Back at their sprawling Mercer Island estate, his wife Amara was fighting a very different kind of battle. Amara Montgomery was a force of nature forced into a state of hibernation. A brilliant, fiercely intelligent black woman with degrees in software engineering and corporate law from Stanford, she was the actual architect of Meridian Analytics. Years ago, when the company was just a chaotic startup operating out of their cramped apartment, Amara had written the core algorithm that made their predictive software indispensable. However, when it came time to secure Series A funding, the harsh reality of Silicon Valley venture capital reared its ugly head. The predominantly older conservative investors at firms like Bessemer and Sequoia subconsciously hesitated to hand tens of millions of dollars to a young black female engineer. Pragmatic to her core, Amara made a calculated business decision. She installed Albion, her handsome, charismatic, and undeniably white husband, as the face of the company. She trained him on the jargon, fed him the talking points through an earpiece during initial pitches, and watched as the checks rolled in. Over the years, Albion began to believe his own press. He convinced himself that his handshakes and golf games were the true backbone of the company, conveniently forgetting the sleepless nights Amara spent rewriting the very code that paid for his tailored Italian suits. Then, the lupus struck. It started as joint pain and profound fatigue, eventually cascading into severe flare-ups that left Amara largely confined to the master suite of their multi-million-dollar home. The vibrant, commanding woman who once orchestrated corporate takeovers from her kitchen island was now forced to manage her symptoms with heavy doses of corticosteroids and immunosuppressants. Albion's response to his wife's illness was a masterclass in quiet abandonment. Instead of stepping up, he leaned out. He hired a private nursing staff, outsourced the management of the household, and most fatally brought in Rosie to act as a full-time nanny for their 6-year-old twins, Leo and Maya. Rosie Jenkins was 22, freshly graduated with a degree in communications she hardly used, and possessed the kind of wide-eyed, youthful admiration that acted as an aphrodisiac for a man undergoing a midlife crisis. She was from a small town in Oregon, dazzled by the wealth of the Montgomery household, and even more dazzled by Albion. Where Amara offered Albion intellectual challenge and a grounding reality check, Rosie offered nothing but pure, unadulterated adulation. To Rosie, Albion was a titan of industry. To Albion, Rosie was a mirror reflecting his most inflated sense of self. It didn't take long for the boundaries to blur. It started with Albion pouring Rosie a glass of expensive Cabernet after the twins went to sleep. It progressed to lingering touches in the kitchen, while Amara was upstairs resting completely drained by her medical treatments. Within 3 months, Albion and Rosie were engaged in a full-blown affair right under the roof that Amara had bought and paid for. Albion justified his betrayal with staggering narcissism. He convinced himself that he was a victim of circumstance. He was a virile, successful CEO in the prime of his life, How could anyone expect him to remain tethered to a sick room? He told himself that Amara had changed, that her illness had made her distant and cold. He conveniently ignored the fact that her distance was actually the debilitating exhaustion of an autoimmune disease, and her coldness was a byproduct of watching her husband openly flirt with the help while she struggled to walk down the stairs. Upstairs, Amara saw everything. Lupus had attacked her immune system, but it had left her razor-sharp intellect completely untouched. She noticed the subtle shifts in Albion's schedule, the late dinners with investors that didn't align with the company's current quiet period. She noticed the way Rosie's cheap, sickly sweet vanilla perfume began to linger on Albion's collar. She noticed the whispers that stopped abruptly when she managed to slowly navigate her way into the kitchen for a glass of water. Amara didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw the expensive porcelain vases that decorated their foyer. Instead, she opened her encrypted laptop. While Albion was busy playing house with the nanny and acting like the king of Seattle's tech scene, Amara was quietly communicating with her personal legal counsel at Cooley LLP, one of the most ruthless corporate law firms on the West Coast. She began requesting forensic audits of Albion's corporate spending. What she found was a trail of Arrogant's company funds used for weekend getaways with Rosie to Whistler expensive jewelry purchased at Cartier under the guise of corporate gifting, and a dangerous level of complacency in Albion's handling of Meridian's day-to-day operations. Albion had forgotten the golden rule of his own life. Amara was the architect. He was just the tenant. By the time the rainy Seattle winter gave way to early spring, Albion's arrogance had morphed into outright delusion. He was no longer satisfied with sneaking around. He wanted a clean break. He wanted the house, the kids, the company, and the young, beautiful woman on his arm. He wanted to shed Amara like an old, heavy winter coat that no longer suited his aesthetic. Albion's plan was agonizingly cliché. He scheduled a meeting with a high-profile divorce attorney, a shark named Richard Davies, known for aggressively securing favorable settlements for wealthy men. Albion strutted into Davies' office with the confidence of a man holding a royal flush. "She's unwell, Richard," Albion had said, swirling a glass of scotch the lawyer had offered. "She can barely get out of bed most days. I need full custody of the twins. It's what's best for them. Rosie, my household manager, essentially raises them anyway. As for the assets, I'm the CEO of Meridian. The company's valuation is entirely tied to my leadership. I'm willing to offer Amara a generous alimony package to cover her medical expenses. Maybe let her keep the summer house in Carmel. But I need the Mercer Island estate, and obviously controlling interest in the company." Davies, looking over the preliminary documents Albion had provided, nodded slowly. "If she is as incapacitated as you say, Albion, a judge will likely favor you for primary custody. We can frame it around her medical inability to provide active care. As for the company, since it was founded during the marriage, it's community property. But given your role as CEO, we can argue that your active management is the sole driver of its value, forcing a buyout of her half on favorable terms." Albion left the office feeling invincible. He returned home that evening to find Rosie in the kitchen, wearing one of his expensive cashmere sweaters that hung halfway down her thighs, chopping vegetables for dinner. The domestic fantasy was intoxicating. "I talked to the lawyers today," Albion murmured, wrapping his arms around Rosie's waist and kissing her neck. "It's happening. We're going to be free." Rosie turned, a radiant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Really, oh Albion, I've hated sneaking around. I just want to take care of you and the twins. You deserve a wife who can actually be a partner to you, not a patient." The sheer cruelty of the statement didn't even register with Albion. He simply kissed her deeply. I'm going to tell her tonight. It's time. Upstairs, Amara was having a surprisingly good day. The latest round of treatments had reduced the inflammation in her joints, and the relentless brain fog had lifted. She was sitting in a velvet armchair by the window, a warm cup of peppermint tea in her hands, watching the grey waters of Lake Washington lap against their private dock. Her laptop rested on a small table beside her, displaying a finalized legal document from Cooley LLP. When the bedroom door opened, Amara didn't flinch. Albion walked in his posture, rigid, wearing the solemn expression of a man about to deliver bad news to an underling. "Amara, we need to talk," he said, remaining standing near the foot of the bed, creating a physical distance between them. "I imagine we do, Albion," Amara replied smoothly, not taking her eyes off the lake. Her voice was calm, devoid of the emotional hysteria Albion had braced himself for. Albion cleared his throat, thrown slightly off balance by her composure. "I'm not going to drag this out. This marriage isn't working anymore. It hasn't worked for a long time. Your illness, it's changed our dynamic. I need a partner, Amara, someone who can stand by my side. I'm filing for divorce." Amara finally turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no sorrow in her gaze, only a chilling, clinical observation. "I see. And I suppose Rosie is the partner you're referring to?" Albion blinked a flash of panic, crossing his face, before he masked it with defiance. "Don't make this about Rosie. This is about us. She stepped in when you couldn't. She's great with the kids. In fact, my lawyer and I agree that it's in the twins' best interest that I take primary custody. You can't keep up with them, Amara. You know that." Amara took a slow sip of her tea. The audacity of this mediocre man was almost poetic. "You want custody. And what else, Albion?" Emboldened by her lack of resistance, Albion pressed his advantage. "I want the house. It makes sense for the kids to stay in their home with Rosie and me. I'll make sure you're taken care of course. A generous monthly stipend for your treatments. And as for Meridian," he puffed out his chest, the proud CEO, "I'll buy out your half of the community property shares over a 10-year period. It's a more than fair deal. I built that company into what it is today. It needs my leadership." Amara placed her teacup down with a soft clink. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. Albion shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the tears, the screaming, the begging. Instead, Amara smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile that Albion hadn't seen since the early days of their startup, right before Amara ruthlessly dismantled a competitor's software code. "Albion." Amara began her tone, conversational, almost light. "Do you remember the corporate restructuring we did 4 years ago, right before our Series B funding round with Andreessen Horowitz?" Albion frowned, confused by the pivot. "Of course. We converted from an LLC to a Delaware C Corp to prepare for future public offerings." "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with everything," Amara said, standing up. She leaned heavily on her cane, but her presence filled the massive room, instantly reducing Albion's stature. "You see, Albion, you spent the last 4 years giving keynote speeches at SXSW and playing golf with venture capitalists in Palo Alto. You signed the incorporation documents I put in front of you, without reading the operating agreements. You assumed that because your title was CEO, you were the king." She walked slowly toward him, the rhythmic tap of her cane against the hardwood floor, sounding like the ticking of a time bomb. "You don't own 50% of Meridian Analytics, Albion. Meridian Analytics is a wholly owned subsidiary of Washington Hayes Holdings." Albion's face went slack. "What, no? That's just a parent entity for tax purposes. We own that together. No, Albion, we don't own it, Amara corrected, stopping 3 feet away from him. My family trust owns it. The trust my grandfather set up, which I restructured to hold my intellectual property before we even got married. The proprietary algorithm that runs Meridian belongs exclusively to Washington Hayes. I licensed it to Meridian. Albion's breath hitched. He tried to process the words, but his mind, so used to coasting on superficial knowledge, was stalling. We're married. Washington State is a community property state. Whatever you own, I own half. Not when the assets are held in an irrevocable trust established prior to the marriage and maintained with strict separation of funds, shielded by an airtight prenuptial agreement that you signed because you were too eager to get access to my seed money 10 years ago. Amara countered her voice, dropping to a lethal whisper. You are not my partner, Albion. You are a W-2 employee. You are a glorified mascot. Albion stumbled back half a step, the color draining from his face. You're bluffing, my lawyer. Your lawyer, Richard Davies, is a pit bull for standard divorces, but he hasn't looked at the corporate bylaws, Amara interrupted. She reached over to her laptop, tapped a few keys, and turned the screen toward him. This is a termination notice effective immediately, drafted by Cooley LLP and approved by the Board of Directors of Washington Hayes Holdings, which incidentally consists of me, my brother, and my lead investor. We voted an hour ago. Albion stared at the screen, the bold black letters blurring together. Termination for cause. For a cause, he choked out his voice, cracking. You can't fire me. I'm the CEO. You were the CEO, Amara corrected gently, though her eyes were ice. You are being terminated for cause due to gross misuse of company funds, taking your mistress to Whistler on the corporate Amex, buying her a $20,000 Cartier watch under the expense code for client retention, that is embezzlement, Albion. It breaches your fiduciary duty. Because you are being fired, because your golden parachute is voided. You get nothing. At that exact moment, the bedroom door swung open. Rosie bounded into the room, holding a wooden spoon, oblivious to the nuclear fallout occurring. Albion, the pasta water is boiling, are you? She stopped, noticing the absolute devastation on Albion's face and the terrifyingly calm posture of the woman she had dismissed as a dying invalid. Amara turned her gaze to the young nanny. Rosie shrank back under the intensity of the look. Rosie, Amara said, her tone suddenly polite. Please pack your bags. You have 30 minutes to vacate my property and leave the cashmere sweater. It belongs to me. Albion's immediate reaction was a masterclass in denial. After Rosie had frantically shoved her belongings into a couple of duffel bags and fled the Mercer Island estate, opting for an Uber Black that Albion's now frozen corporate account declined, Albion locked himself in his home office. He spent the next 4 hours making increasingly panicked phone calls. First, he called Meridian Analytics IT department, demanding his email access be restored. A junior technician voice, trembling, informed him that a firm-wide memo had already been circulated by the board. Albion was legally prohibited from accessing company servers. Next, he called Richard Davies, his high-priced divorce attorney. When Albion breathlessly recounted the situation, the trust, the termination, the embezzlement, accusations, the line went dead silent for a long, agonizing minute. Albion. Davies finally sighed, the sharp, predatory edge gone from his voice, replaced by the tired tone of a man dealing with a fool. Did you actually read the prenuptial agreement you signed 10 years ago? Or the corporate bylaws? Because I just pulled the filings from the Delaware Secretary of State. Amara isn't bluffing. Washington Hayes Holdings owns the IP. You are a W-2 employee with a title, and if she has a forensic audit from KPMG, proving you used company funds for personal affairs with a subordinate, you aren't just looking at a divorce, you are looking at federal wire fraud. But the community property, Albion yelled, slamming his fist onto his mahogany desk. I built that brand I pitched to Sequoia. I deserve half. You deserve a criminal defense attorney, which I am not, Davies replied coldly. Unless you can wire a $200,000 retainer to my escrow account by tomorrow morning, I am withdrawing as your counsel. Good luck, Albion. By Friday, the sheer scale of Amara's meticulous planning became apparent. She had not acted in a fit of jealous rage. She had orchestrated a surgical strike. The joint bank accounts were frozen pending mediation, but Amara had her own vast personal wealth, shielded in her family trust. Albion, who spent his multi-million-dollar salary as fast as he earned it on bespoke suits, luxury cars, and a lifestyle designed to impress men richer than him, was suddenly practically liquidless. He was forced to move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Bellevue that he managed to secure only by liquidating his personal 401k at a massive penalty. Rosie moved in with him, but the domestic bliss they had fantasized about evaporated the moment the reality of budget constraints set in. Rosie had fallen in love with Albion, the CEO, the man who commanded private tables at Canlis, who flew her to Whistler via chartered helicopter, and who swiped his black card without looking at the bill. She did not know how to love Albion, the disgraced unemployed middle-aged man who spent his days pacing their small living room in sweatpants, screaming at junior lawyers over the phone. The breaking point for their illicit romance came just 3 weeks later. Rosie was sitting on a cheap IKEA sofa she had assembled herself, watching Albion aggressively type an email on his iPad. Albion, my credit card was declined at Whole Foods today. Rosie said, her voice laced with the petulant whine of a child denied a toy. And we need to pay the electric bill. Are you going to get a new job soon? Can't you just call your friends at Andreessen Horowitz and start a new company? Albion snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot and dark circles prominent on his pale face. My friends at Andreessen won't return my calls. Rosie Amara sent a dossier of my corporate expenses to every major VC firm on the West Coast under the guise of an executive transition transparency report. I am radioactive. No one is going to give me a dime. Rosie stared at him, the illusion finally shattering. The man before her wasn't a titan of industry. He was a hollow shell who had been entirely propped up by the brilliant black woman he had foolishly discarded. So, you have no money? Rosie asked, her voice dropping its sweet, youthful cadence, replaced by cold calculation. We will figure it out, Albion pleaded, stepping toward her. I just need to leverage a settlement out of the custody dispute. Amara won't want a public trial. She'll pay me to go away. But Rosie was already pulling out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. She wasn't built for the trenches. 2 days later, while Albion was out meeting with a cut-rate lawyer, he found on Yelp Rosie packed her bags again. She left a post-it note on the kitchen counter. I'm too young for this much stress. Going back to Oregon. Don't call me. While Albion's life was actively imploding, Amara's was expanding. The stress of managing a deceitful husband had been a silent, heavy weight on her immune system. With the toxicity excised from her home and under the care of top-tier rheumatologists, her lupus flare-ups became significantly less frequent and less severe. She wasn't just resting, she was rebuilding. She stepped out of the shadows and officially assumed the title of CEO of Meridian Analytics. When the industry press caught wind of the executive shakeup, there were initial whispers of doubt. Could the reclusive engineer handle the spotlight? Amara silenced them within a week. She gave an exclusive interview to Forbes, detailing the next-generation AI integrations she had been coding from her bed. The stock valuation didn't just stabilize, it skyrocketed. The investors realized that the true genius had finally taken the wheel. 6 months after the separation, the final mediation for the divorce and custody arrangement was held in a sterile glass-walled conference room at Cooley LLP's downtown Seattle offices. Amara arrived wearing a tailored emerald green pantsuit, looking radiant sharp and undeniably powerful. She walked without her cane today. Beside her sat her lead counsel and a mountain of perfectly organized legal boxes. Albion arrived looking 10 years older. His suit, once perfectly fitted, hung loosely on his frame. He was represented by a nervous, sweaty attorney who looked thoroughly intimidated by the environment. The mediation didn't last long. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Mr. Montgomery, Amara's lawyer began sliding a thick binder across the table. We have compiled a comprehensive list of the embezzled corporate funds, totaling roughly $450,000. Furthermore, our IT security flagged a digital intrusion on the day of your termination. You attempted to download Meridian's core source code to a personal hard drive. Albion went pale. He had tried to steal the code as a bargaining chip, thinking he could sell it to a competitor. Fortunately for you, Amara's lawyer continued smoothly. Ms. Washington Hayes had anticipated such an amateur move and walled off the actual IP. You downloaded 3 gigabytes of dummy files laced with a tracking beacon. We have a clear-cut case for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Albion's lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically in Albion's ear. Albion looked like he might vomit. Amara leaned forward, steepling her fingers. For the first time that day, she spoke directly to the man who had tried to discard her. "Here is the deal, Albion," Amara said, her voice calm and authoritative, echoing off the glass walls. "You will sign away any and all claims to spousal support. You will agree to a custody arrangement where I have 100% legal and physical custody of Leo and Maya. You will receive supervised visitation 1 weekend a month, provided you pass regular psychological and financial stability evaluations." Albion's hands shook. "Amara, please. They're my kids. You can't just erase me. You erased yourself the moment you brought your mistress into my house and plotted to steal my company." Amara replied, her dark eyes completely devoid of pity. "If you sign this agreement today, I will classify the $450,000 as a retroactive, heavily taxed executive bonus. I will bury the espionage evidence. You get to walk away with your freedom, but nothing else. If you fight me on a single clause, I will hand this binder over to the FBI field office across the street, and you will go to federal prison." Albion looked at his lawyer, desperate for a loophole, a defense, anything. His lawyer simply nodded, pushing a pen toward him. "Take the deal." With a trembling hand, Albion signed his name, officially terminating his marriage, his empire, and his ego in one stroke. 2 years later, the tech world watched in awe as Meridian Analytics went public. Amara Washington Hayes stood on the balcony of the NASDAQ exchange in New York, flanked by her healthy, smiling twins, Leo and Maya. As she pressed the button to ring the opening bell, confetti rained down, and the screens flashed a market cap of over $2 billion. She had taken the shattered pieces of her life and built an untouchable fortress. Back in Seattle, Albion sat in a bleak cubicle at a mid-tier logistics company, working a commission-based sales job. He took a sip of lukewarm break-room coffee and glanced up at the muted television mounted on the wall. He watched his ex-wife, brilliant, beautiful, and triumphant, ring the bell. He watched the world applaud the true architect. He turned back to his spreadsheet, the silence of his obscurity deafening, finally realizing the true cost of trading gold for brass. Did you enjoy this wild tale of karma, corporate revenge, and ultimate triumph? Amara's brilliant counterstrike proves that true power lies in the mind, not just the title. If you loved watching a brilliant architect reclaim her empire from a deceitful husband, smash that like button, share this story with someone who needs a reminder to always know their worth and read their contracts. Don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, real-life inspired stories of betrayal, justice, and epic comebacks.